When I bought that 100-year-old mansion, people laughed. They said, "The HOA will eat you alive." I smiled back, thinking I could handle anything. But I had no idea that months later, a county sheriff would stand at my door with a notice that read, "Pay up, or we'll destroy it." If you believe that justice always finds its way, that karma never forgets, then stay till the end. And subscribe to witness how truth fights back when power goes too far. In a quiet American suburb, where every lawn was trimmed at the same angle and every house looked like a copy-paste of the next, one property stood apart. Old, sun-bleached, its windows boarded, its soul forgotten. Locals called it the weather house because for years it had faced only storms, never people. The first time I saw it, the evening sun was sinking low, washing the cracked facade in gold. The boards glowed faintly, and for a second, I could swear the house whispered, "Save me." That was the moment I fell for it. I'm a restorer by trade, someone who brings old structures back to life. But this wasn't just a project. It felt like history itself was asking for one more chance. Built in 1921, once known as the Miller family mansion, it had hosted parties, laughter, and generations. Now it was nothing but peeling paint and silence. The price was absurdly low because the HOA had labeled it an abandoned hazard. I signed the papers without hesitation. Maybe I was reckless, or maybe some dreams are too stubborn to die. The first day I unlocked the door, the hinges groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Dust swirled in the sunlight, and on the living room wall hung the faint outline of where a family portrait used to be. In one corner, old newspapers lay scattered. One headline read, "Miller Mansion, the Jewel of Maple Creek, 1921. It gave me chills. This wasn't just wood and brick, it was a monument to time. I started the restoration alone. Every beam, every cracked tile, every window, my hands on all of it. At night, the place glowed with work lights, and the hum of tools echoed through the cul-de-sac. Neighbors peeked from their porches. Some smiled, curious. Others frowned, whispering complaints about noise past 9. And then came the HOA. The first letter arrived 3 weeks in. A thick white envelope stamped, "Violation Notice." They claimed I had made unauthorized exterior modifications, changing paint, removing the old fence, cutting a dead tree, without permission. I was stunned. I hadn't altered anything, just cleaned. But under HOA bylaws, even restoration counted as modification if it changed the neighborhood's visual harmony. I sent a detailed reply with photos and an explanation. A week later, another letter arrived. $500 fine, failure to comply. No warning, no discussion. Just a bill. I refused to pay. Not out of arrogance, but because I knew I was right. That was the start of a quiet war. Every week a new envelope appeared. Noise complaint. Improper waste disposal. Unapproved material color. It was like someone inside the HOA had decided to break me through bureaucracy. 4 months passed. The mansion began to transform. The new wood shimmered honey brown under the sun. Fresh white paint breathed life into the walls. The fountain out front, silent for decades, sprang to life again. The gentle splash of water became my reward each evening. But peace in HOA land is always temporary. One morning, while trimming shrubs by the walkway, a black SUV rolled up and stopped at the curb. The door opened, and a tall man in uniform stepped out, badge gleaming on his chest, County Sheriff. He called my name. "Mr. Reed?" I nodded. Then he said the words that froze the air around me. "By order of the Maple Creek HOA, you owe $15,300 in fees and penalties. Failure to pay within 7 days will result in a property lien and cessation of all construction." 15,000. I thought he was joking. But when he handed me the official document, my stomach dropped. Each fine, each late fee, each so-called administrative cost, stacked neatly, turning dust into debt. I spent that night combing through every record, every email. None of it made sense. It was like the HOA had built a financial trap around me, brick by invisible brick. I filed an appeal immediately. Days later, a curt email from the HOA chair, Martin Clarence, arrived. Just one sentence. Rules are rules. Compliance is mandatory. That was the moment something shifted inside me. I wasn't restoring just the house anymore. I was restoring the truth. I poured myself into the work harder than ever. The scent of new timber mixed with the crisp autumn air. Neighbors who once doubted me now stopped to admire it. One man said, "You brought life back to this street." I smiled, but deep down, I knew the HOA saw it differently. To them, I wasn't a restorer, I was a rebel. Then came the final blow. One evening, the sun dipping below the rooftops, I noticed a red paper fluttering on my front door. The header screamed in bold letters, "Final warning, non-compliance will result in demolition order." My hands trembled as I read it. They were threatening to tear it down, the home I'd saved, rebuilt, and loved. Every nail, every plank, every drop of sweat. They wanted to erase it. I looked up at the house bathed in the last amber light of day. It stood tall, proud, defiant, like it knew this battle wasn't over. And in that silence, I made a promise. They could find me, threaten me, even send sheriffs to my door. But they would not break me. Because this house had already survived a century of storms. It would survive this one too. The wind carried the faint rustle of the red notice as the sky turned violet. Somewhere deep inside I could feel it. The real war was just beginning. The red notice stayed on my door like a scar. Neighbors slowed their cars just to read it, whispering as they passed. Some avoided eye contact altogether, afraid of being associated with the man who dared to challenge the HOA. That night I couldn't sleep. The house creaked under the shifting autumn wind, and every sound felt like a reminder that someone, somewhere, wanted this place gone. I sat in the living room surrounded by blueprints and legal papers. The old fireplace crackled weakly, as if trying to keep the ghosts of the past at bay. That's when the headlights flashed across the window again. The same black SUV. My stomach clenched. It was nearly midnight. The sheriff stepped out, his boots heavy on the gravel. He didn't look like a man on official business this time. His face carried something else. Guilt, maybe? He knocked twice, then entered when I opened the door. His voice was lower now. "Mr. Reed. I shouldn't be here, but you need to know something." He set a small folder on my table and exhaled, the kind of breath a man gives when he's about to cross a line. "These orders, the lien, the demolition, they weren't approved by the county. The HOA's chair, Martin Clarence, pushed them through himself. And he's not doing it for compliance." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" I asked, but he didn't answer. He just looked toward the house's staircase, the one I had restored by hand, and said, "Just be careful. This house isn't the only thing he wants." He left before I could say another word. I stood frozen, staring at the folder. Inside were internal memos, emails between HOA members. The language was corporate, sterile, but the meaning was brutal. Reed's property borders the East Ridge expansion zone. If the structure is cleared, the land merges into HOA's redevelopment rights. Martin says it's worth millions. There it was. It wasn't about rules, or paint, or fences. It was about land, my land. Maple Creek was planning an upscale expansion, luxury condos, commercial plazas, all under HOA management. And my mansion stood right in the middle of their blueprint. I leaned back, my chest tightening. The house I was trying to save was sitting on gold. For the next few days, I became an investigator more than a builder. I dug into county records, tax filings, and old ownership deeds. What I found confirmed everything. Martin Clarence had quietly bought properties around mine through proxies, forcing owners to sell with fines and legal harassment. Mine was the last piece of the puzzle, the keystone. He needed it cleared. And the HOA was his weapon. I began documenting everything. Photos of letters, timestamps of fines, recordings of meetings. I knew they'd come for me, so I started preparing for it. But still, I kept working on the mansion. Maybe out of defiance. Maybe because I couldn't stop. The house was coming alive again, the wooden stairs gleamed, the chandeliers sparkled with new light, and the garden, once overrun with weeds, now smelled of jasmine. Neighbors began to notice. Some who once complained now brought cookies, thanked me for reviving the pride of Maple Creek. But kindness in an HOA neighborhood is a fragile thing. Because 3 days later, the power went out. Not just mine, only mine. I called the utility company. They said the disconnection was requested by the property's managing association, the HOA. For 2 nights, I worked by lantern. The house felt darker than ever, like the century-old spirits that once lived here were holding their breath. On the 3rd morning, a pickup truck arrived. 2 men in reflective vests stepped out, carrying orange spray paint and stakes. When I asked what they were doing, one replied casually, "Marking the perimeter for demolition." It hit me like a punch. They were serious. I immediately drove to the HOA office, a pristine glass building at the end of Maple Creek Boulevard. Inside, everything smelled like disinfectant and fake civility. Receptionists smiled with rehearsed politeness, directing me to a waiting room where even the air felt judgmental. Then the door opened, and Martin Clarence walked in. He was everything I expected, slick, smiling, the kind of man whose handshake feels like a contract you never read. "Mr. Reed," he said smoothly, "I hoped we could talk before things escalated further." I stared at him. "You're trying to steal my home." He chuckled softly, like I'd said something naive. "No one's stealing anything. We're enforcing community standards. Unfortunately, your restoration doesn't meet our architectural guidelines." I wanted to shout, to throw his words back in his face, but he leaned in and whispered, "Or we can make this easy. Sign a release. Transfer the property back to the association. You'll get fair compensation, more than fair, really." My silence was my answer. His smile vanished. "In that case," he said coldly, "expect enforcement. 7 days, Mr. Reed. After that, we'll take it down ourselves." He walked out, leaving me standing in that sterile office with my heart pounding. That night, I sat on the porch, staring at the mansion glowing faintly under the moonlight. The fountain trickled gently. The old house seemed to watch me back, steady, silent. I thought about the Millers, the family who built this place a century ago. They had survived wars, storms, recessions, yet now, their legacy was being threatened by paperwork and greed. But I wasn't them. I had evidence. I had truth. And if I played this right, I could bring the entire HOA empire crashing down. So I called the sheriff. The same man who'd warned me. He didn't pick up the first time. But when he finally did, his voice was tense. "Reed, whatever you're planning, be careful. Martin has friends higher up than you think." I replied. "Then maybe it's time someone shows them what real neighbors look like." The line went quiet for a moment, then he said, "I'll see what I can find." The next morning, I woke to find something new on my front porch. A brown envelope. No return address. Inside, photos. Martin, standing with a group of developers, shaking hands in front of a construction site. A banner behind them read, "Future site of Maple Creek East Luxury Condos, Phase 1. The photo date? 2 months ago. The decision to demolish my mansion had been made long before the first notice was sent. They'd planned everything. And now, they'd made their biggest mistake. Because I had proof. As I stared at the pictures, a strange calm settled over me. The war wasn't coming anymore. It had already begun. The morning after I found those photos, Maple Creek didn't feel the same. Every porch light, every curtain that twitched as I passed, it all felt like eyes. Watching. Waiting. The HOA had declared war, but this time, I wasn't going to fight alone. I started small. I scanned the documents, the memos, the photos, the proof of Martin Clarence's hidden deals, and uploaded everything to a private folder. Then I wrote a long post in the neighborhood's community forum, titled, "The Truth Behind the HOA's Demolition Plan." I didn't accuse. I just showed evidence. Screenshots of internal emails, notes from the sheriff's folder, and a comparison of property maps that revealed exactly how my land connected to the proposed Maple Creek East development. It went viral, at least within our small world. By noon, every homeowner in Maple Creek had seen it. Some called it fake. Others defended me. But something shifted that day. For the first time, the HOA's power didn't feel absolute. By evening, I heard murmurs around the block. People standing in driveways, whispering things like, "If they did that to him, they could do it to any of us." And that was true. That night, I sat on the mansion's porch steps, listening to the neighborhood breathe. Somewhere, a dog barked. A sprinkler hissed. The wind carried the faint scent of autumn leaves and fear. Then a car slowed near my driveway. It wasn't the sheriff this time. It was Eleanor Davis, one of the HOA board members. A retired teacher with silver hair and the kind of posture that made everyone listen. She didn't get out of the car, just rolled down her window. "I shouldn't be here," she said, voice trembling slightly. "But you're right. About all of it. Martin's been using HOA funds for personal projects. That's why the fines keep increasing. He needs the cash flow to cover the missing money." I stepped closer. "Can you prove it?" She nodded weakly. "I'll try. But be careful. If he finds out I talked to you, I'll lose everything." Then she drove off, leaving me alone with the sound of crickets and the faint hum of streetlights. That night, I backed up every file, every photo, every message I'd collected, and sent copies to 3 different places: my lawyer, the local newspaper, and one more to an anonymous email titled maplecreekwatchdog@outlook.com. I didn't know who ran that page, but they'd been posting HOA scandals from across the state for years. If something happened to me, at least the truth wouldn't die with me. The next morning, the retaliation began. A tow truck came from my work van claiming I'd violated parking restrictions. A letter followed, declaring me temporarily banned from all community meetings for disruptive conduct. And then, the most humiliating move of all, they sent landscapers to mow down my front garden, the one I'd spent months restoring, calling it non-compliant vegetation. Each act was designed to provoke, to crush morale, but it only fueled me more. 3 days later, I got a call. It was the sheriff again. His voice was lower than usual, urgent. "Reed, whatever you did, it's working. County auditors just opened a quiet investigation into the HOA's finances. But Martin knows. He's angry. I think he's coming for you next." "Let him come," I said, staring at the half-ruined garden. "This house has seen worse than him." And sure enough, he did come. That Saturday morning, Maple Creek's residents woke to the sound of heavy machinery. A demolition crew stood at my gate, engines rumbling, waiting for a command. Martin Clarence himself stood in front of them, wearing his signature-tailored suit and sunglasses, holding a clipboard like a weapon. Neighbors poured out of their homes, phones in hand, recording everything. Martin raised his voice. "This structure has been deemed unsafe by HOA inspection. We are authorized to proceed." I stepped out onto the porch, heart pounding. "You're not authorized by anyone but yourself." He smirked. "Tell that to the crew. They're paid by the hour." And then something unexpected happened. From across the street, Eleanor Davis appeared, holding a folder. She walked straight up to Martin, eyes blazing, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You want authorization? Show them this." She opened the folder and handed him a printed report, copies of bank statements and signatures. "You've been moving HOA funds to your private account for months, Martin. Every fine, every so-called violation, it's been paying for your new development." The crowd gasped. Someone started filming closer. Martin tried to grab the papers, but Eleanor stepped back. "You can't bury this anymore," she said. "The sheriff's already seen it." Almost on cue, a familiar SUV turned the corner. The sheriff stepped out, hand resting on his belt. "Mr. Clarence, I think we need to have a word." For the first time, Martin looked rattled. He muttered something about misunderstandings and pending approvals. But it was too late. The crowd had already turned against him. Neighbors shouted questions. Phones flashed. Even the demolition crews shut off their engines, sensing this was no longer a safe job. I stood on the porch, silent, watching the power dynamics shift in real time. It wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about every homeowner who'd ever been bullied, every family fined for the wrong shade of paint, every small act of control masquerading as community order. The sheriff didn't arrest Martin, not yet, but he escorted him away for questioning. Before leaving, he looked up at me and nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement that the tide was turning. When the engine stopped and the crowd began to disperse, I walked down the steps. The red demolition notice still hung on the door, flapping in the wind like a defeated flag. I tore it down and crushed it in my fist. That night, Maple Creek felt different again. The same streetlights, the same fences, but there was something new in the air. Defiance. Neighbors who once avoided me now waved as they passed. Someone even left a note on my mailbox. "Keep fighting. You're making this place better." I smiled faintly. But deep down, I knew Martin Clarence wasn't finished. Men like him don't go quietly. As I locked the door, I glanced once more at the old Miller portrait I'd found months ago, now hanging proudly in the hallway. A century ago, this mansion survived time. Now, it had survived tyranny. But somewhere beyond the quiet hum of the night, I could feel it. The storm wasn't over. Just delayed. Because when powerful men fall, they don't fall alone. They drag everything down with them. By sunrise the next day, the story had already escaped Maple Creek. A video of the confrontation, Eleanor's accusation, Martin's stunned silence, the sheriff's arrival, was everywhere. Within 12 hours, it had 50,000 views on a local news channel's Facebook page. The caption read, "HOA chair accused of corruption, homeowner fights demolition order." And just like that, my quiet street turned into a battlefield of headlines. Reporters parked outside the gates. Neighbors who once complained about noise were now offering coffee to journalists. Every word I'd ever written on the community forum was dissected, analyzed, debated. I didn't want fame. I just wanted peace. But peace had a way of vanishing when truth finally came to light. The sheriff called me that morning. "They're opening a county inquiry," he said. "Auditors found suspicious transfers from HOA accounts into shell companies. Martin's name is on some of them." He paused. "But be careful, Reed. He's not backing down quietly. He's got lawyers, and he's got influence." I already knew that. Because that same afternoon, a letter arrived from the HOA's legal firm, claiming I'd violated defamation laws, and demanding an immediate retraction of my public statements. I read it twice, then set it on fire in the fireplace. Let them watch it burn. The mansion had seen flames before. It would see them again. But this time, they weren't a symbol of destruction, they were rebirth. Still, I couldn't ignore the toll. Eleanor had resigned from the board and was now facing threats online. The sheriff confided that he was being pressured by county supervisors to stand down and let civil courts handle it. Even my own mailbox filled with anonymous letters, some supportive, others venomous. One simply said, "Stop digging. You'll regret it." But I didn't stop. Instead, I went deeper. Late nights blurred into early mornings as I combed through HOA filings, comparing signatures, invoices, and approvals. That's when I found the smoking gun. A document titled, Phase 2, East Ridge Corporate Reallocation. Hidden among lines of legal jargon, one sentence stood out. Upon clearance of the Reed property, the Maple Creek Association will transfer title to Clarence Development Group for project initiation. They hadn't even waited for my house to be demolished. They'd already planned the transfer, in writing. That document was dynamite. So I took it straight to the local news. The journalist I met, a woman named Karen Holt, had the kind of calm intensity that could slice through any story. She read the paper, looked up at me, and said quietly, "You understand what this means?" This isn't just HOA fraud. This is racketeering. Her exposé went live 2 days later. Headline: Homeowner exposes $1 million HOA development scam. County launches criminal investigation. The article hit like a shockwave. Martin's photo, the mansion, even a clip of me standing in front of the house, it was all there. My phone didn't stop ringing for hours. Some were reporters. Others were strangers. A few were victims from other neighborhoods, thanking me for speaking up. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt like I'd won. But victory in these stories never comes clean. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of shattering glass. My heart jumped. Downstairs, the front window had been smashed. On the floor lay a brick wrapped in paper. Written in thick black marker were 3 words. Leave. Or else. I didn't call the police. I didn't need to. I knew exactly who sent it. The next morning, the sheriff stopped by. His tone was heavier than before. Martin's on bail, he said. His lawyers are spinning this as a misunderstanding in accounting. They're painting you as unstable, a disgruntled homeowner who fabricated evidence. I laughed, but it wasn't humor. It was exhaustion. They can say what they want. The documents don't lie. He hesitated. You might want to stay somewhere else for a while. Just until this cools down. But how could I? Leaving the mansion now would mean surrendering everything I'd fought for. So I stayed. That evening, something extraordinary happened. Dozens of Maple Creek residents showed up at my gate, some with candles, others with handmade signs. One said, "Save the mansion." Another, "We are not property." It wasn't a protest. It was unity. For the first time, Maple Creek wasn't afraid. We stood under the streetlights together, the fountain bubbling quietly behind me, while the air buzzed with a kind of hope this place hadn't felt in years. Reporters caught it all: live broadcasts, interviews, photos of families standing against the HOA's tyranny. And in the days that followed, the dominoes began to fall. First, 2 HOA board members resigned. Then the county prosecutor announced formal charges of embezzlement, fraud, and coercion against Martin Clarence. When the news broke, I was sitting on the porch with Eleanor. She just smiled faintly and said, "It's over." But I shook my head. "Not yet. They'll rebuild the board. They'll clean up their image. They always do." She sighed. "Then you'll have to rebuild something stronger." Her words stayed with me. In the weeks that followed, the mansion became more than a home. It became a symbol, a reminder that even in manicured neighborhoods built on silence, one voice can echo loud enough to shake walls. The county froze the HOA's bank accounts. The demolition order was nullified. A small victory on paper, but a massive one in spirit. I kept working on the mansion, repainting, repairing, restoring. Every stroke of the brush felt like reclaiming ground they tried to take. But even as the dust settled, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just an intermission, not an ending. Because corruption doesn't disappear, it hides. And men like Martin Clarence never stop fighting for power, they just change their weapons. The night before the final hearing, I walked through the house alone. The halls were quiet, moonlight spilling across polished wood floors. In the reflection of an old mirror, I saw not just myself, but every soul who had lived here before me. The millers. The workers. The dreamers. And I realized, I wasn't just saving a building. I was saving the idea that some places still belong to the people who care for them, not the ones who try to own them. Outside, a soft rain began to fall, washing away the dust and fear that had clung to Maple Creek for too long. Tomorrow, the courthouse would decide everything. But for now, the house slept peacefully, alive again, waiting for dawn. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and rain that morning. Sunlight poured through the high windows, landing on marble floors that had seen generations of quiet battles, divorces, property disputes, betrayals. But today's hearing was different. Today, the town had come to witness a reckoning. Every seat in the small courtroom was filled. Homeowners, reporters, and even former board members lined the benches. At the front sat Martin Clarence, dressed sharply in a charcoal suit, his expression carefully composed, the same calm arrogance he'd worn at every HOA meeting. But his eyes told a different story. There was fear there now, hiding behind the professionalism. He glanced at me once, just once, and I saw the cracks forming. The judge, an older woman named Honorable Lydia Brandt, entered with quiet authority. Her gaze was steady, sharp. "Let's proceed," she said simply. The prosecutor began outlining the charges: fraud, embezzlement, extortion, abuse of authority under HOA statutes. Each word hit like a hammer. Behind me, I could feel the collective breath of the neighborhood, years of frustration compressed into silence. The first witnesses were county auditors. They detailed how Martin had transferred funds meant for community maintenance into private accounts under a shell corporation. They showed the paper trail, the signatures, the matching dates, all leading back to him. Then came the document. The one I had found. The Phase 2 plan, proof that my demolition wasn't about code violations at all, but a land grab designed to sell the property to a developer. When the prosecutor handed it to the judge, the entire courtroom leaned forward. Even Martin's attorney hesitated. "This was drafted before the demolition notice," the prosecutor said, her voice cold and clear. "Before the supposed violations. Before any legal grounds existed to seize the property. It was premeditated." Martin's lawyer tried to interject. Words like procedural misunderstanding and poor bookkeeping floated in the air. But no one was buying it. Still, Martin wasn't done. When his turn to speak came, he rose slowly and addressed the room with calm venom. "I have served this community for 20 years, he said. "Everything I've done was to preserve its integrity. Reed's house was an eyesore, a decaying relic threatening property values. He turned it into a circus, and now you want to believe he's a hero?" A murmur rippled through the room. But the judge silenced it with a single raised hand. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Because truth, when laid bare, doesn't need defending. The final evidence came from a whistleblower, Eleanor. Her testimony was quiet, measured, and devastating. She explained how Martin had coerced board members, how he used HOA fines to control residents, how he silenced dissent. Her voice trembled only once, when she said, "I believed in him. Until I saw what he did to that house. Until I realized he wasn't protecting Maple Creek. He was selling it." By the time she stepped down, the air in the courtroom was electric. The judge called a recess. Outside, rain had stopped, leaving the courthouse steps slick and shining like glass. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. But I said nothing. I wasn't here for fame. I was here for closure. When the session resumed, Martin's defense tried one last trick, a plea deal proposal. If he admitted to mismanagement, but denied intent to defraud, he'd avoid jail time and pay restitution. The prosecutor looked at me before answering. I shook my head. No deals. Not after everything. The judge agreed. "This court will hear the full verdict," she said firmly. And then came the end. After deliberation, Judge Brandt returned with her ruling. "Martin Clarence is hereby found guilty of embezzlement, coercion, and fraudulent misuse of homeowner funds. The court orders restitution to all affected residents, the dissolution of the current HOA board, and the immediate transfer of fiduciary authority to a neutral trustee." For a moment, there was silence. And then, applause. It started softly, one person clapping near the back. Then another. And another. Until the entire room was filled with the sound of people reclaiming their voices. Martin's face hardened. He was led away quietly, his polished shoes clicking against the tile. For all his threats, his control, his arrogance, it ended not with a shout, but with the door closing behind him. Outside the courthouse, the sky had cleared into a brilliant blue. The sun broke through the clouds, lighting the marble steps like a stage. Reporters surrounded me again, shouting questions I barely heard. "How does it feel to win? What's next for the mansion? Do you plan to rebuild the HOA? I didn't have answers. All I said was, I didn't fight to win. I fought to stop losing. That night, the neighborhood was alive with quiet celebration. Families stood on porches again. Kids played near the fountain that once symbolized Martin's power. Someone strung fairy lights between trees, and for the first time in years, laughter filled Maple Creek. Eleanor visited me later that evening. She stood at the gate, looking up at the mansion now glowing under the warm lights of the porch. It looks alive again, she said softly. It is, I replied. So is the neighborhood. She smiled. You changed more than just a house, Reed. You changed people. But even in victory, I felt a strange emptiness, a quiet echo in the halls of the mansion. Because every battle, no matter how justified, leaves scars. Weeks passed. The new trustee dissolved unnecessary HOA rules, refunded illegal fines, and restored homeowner rights. The news cycle moved on. But Maple Creek didn't forget. The mansion became a landmark, not for its architecture, but for what it represented, the day the people fought back. Yet even peace has its shadows. One morning, as I cleared debris from the garden, I found an envelope tucked under the door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A blueprint. Of Maple Creek. But this version was different, larger, expanded, with Phase 3 marked in red ink. And under it, in a familiar hand. This isn't over. I stood there for a long moment, the wind tugging at the paper, the fountain whispering softly behind me. Maybe it wasn't over. Maybe it never truly would be. But this time, I wasn't afraid. Because I had something Martin never did. A community that finally knew its own strength. And a house that would stand long after the next storm came. Autumn arrived quietly that year. The leaves in Maple Creek turned amber and gold, drifting down the old cobblestone paths that lined the neighborhood. From a distance, everything looked peaceful again, lawns trimmed, laughter returning, the faint sound of sprinklers in the morning. But peace is rarely simple. It hides the echoes of what came before. 3 months had passed since the verdict. The HOA was gone, the new trustee in place, and restitution checks were finally being distributed to the homeowners who had been extorted for years. On paper, it was over. But for me, it wasn't. Because of that envelope. That blueprint marked with Phase 3. No signature. No sender. Just a threat, or maybe a warning. For weeks, I kept it locked inside my study drawer. I told no one. Not even Eleanor. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized something disturbing. The blueprint wasn't new. It was old, based on a zoning map that hadn't been updated in over a decade. And there was a name scrawled faintly in pencil in the corner. Clarence Development Group. Martin's company. He might have been in prison, but his influence wasn't. I started digging again, late nights, dusty files, city records. And there it was, a series of quiet transactions happening right after his conviction. Not in Maple Creek, but in the land around it. Small plots. Old lots. Forgotten corners. All being bought under new shell companies with familiar initials. They weren't coming for my house anymore. They were coming for everything around it. I knew then, this wasn't over. Martin's empire had roots deeper than anyone imagined. And someone was still tending them. One evening, Eleanor came by to check on me. She noticed the fatigue in my eyes, the papers scattered across my desk. You're still fighting ghosts, she said gently. Sometimes ghosts are just people who refuse to stay buried, I replied. She nodded quietly. Then maybe it's time to finish what you started. So we did. Together, we built a coalition, not just from Maple Creek, but from nearby neighborhoods too. Communities who had faced similar abuses under different HOA names, different faces, same corruption. We called it the Homeowners Collective. We gathered records, testimonies, and financial links. And what emerged was staggering, a statewide network of fake HOA fronts, all tracing back to the same small circle of investors, Martin's old associates. Their strategy was simple but devastating. buy influence, seize control of HOA boards, then bleed neighborhoods dry through bogus fees and land seizures. It wasn't just about money. It was systemic control, a quiet form of corporate colonization dressed as neighborhood management. When our findings went public, the backlash was explosive. News outlets called it the HOA Empire Scandal. Federal investigators opened an inquiry. And soon, more arrests followed, not just board members, but developers, bankers, and even a county official who'd turned a blind eye. The mansion once again became the backdrop of it all, reporters filming outside, interviews under the tall oak trees, neighbors standing proudly on the steps. But amid all the noise, something beautiful happened. The mansion wasn't just a symbol of defiance anymore. It became a center for community rebuilding. Every Saturday, people came to volunteer, repainting, restoring, landscaping. Children played on the lawn where Martin once threatened to send bulldozers. Elderly neighbors brought cookies and coffee, sharing stories about the early days of Maple Creek, when it was just dirt roads and hope. And one evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the house in golden fire, I realized this wasn't just my home anymore. It belonged to everyone who had fought for it. Months later, I received a letter from the sheriff, the same one who'd first delivered that demolition order. He was retiring. Inside the envelope was a single photograph, the mansion, fully restored, framed by the rising sun. On the back, he'd written, "Sometimes justice takes the long way home." I pinned it to the study wall, right above the burnt corner of the original HOA notice I'd kept all this time. A reminder of where it began. But there was one last surprise. At the dedication ceremony for the newly renamed Maple Creek Heritage Foundation, a woman approached me quietly. She introduced herself as Rebecca Clarence, Martin's daughter. She looked nothing like him. You could see the weight she carried, the shame of her father's legacy. "I wanted to see it," she said softly. "The house that survived him." We walked the grounds together. When she reached the fountain, she touched the marble rim and whispered, "He built so many things to control people. You built something to free them. Thank you for doing what he never could." And for the first time since it all began, I felt something that had eluded me for years: peace. Because in the end, this story wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration, not just of walls and wood, but of faith, of courage, of community. When night fell, I stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking out across the glowing lights of Maple Creek. The air smelled like rain again, clean, new, alive. Below, laughter echoed from the gardens. Children chasing fireflies. Eleanor chatting with volunteers near the fountain that once symbolized power, now simply a place of calm. The mansion had come full circle, from ruin to rebirth. And in its reflection, so had we. Sometimes, I still think about Martin. Whether he understood, in those last quiet days before sentencing, what he'd truly lost. Maybe he did. Maybe that's why he left behind that final plan, his desperate attempt to stay relevant in a world that had moved past him. But the mansion doesn't remember his kind anymore. Its walls now echo with something stronger. Not authority. Not fear. But belonging. And maybe that's what he could never understand. That power isn't ownership. It's stewardship. It's care. It's knowing that when you build something good, it should stand for everyone, not just yourself. As the wind rustled through the old oak trees, I closed the heavy front doors for the night. The brass lock clicked softly, not a sound of defense, but of completion. Because at last, after a century of storms, the mansion, and Maple Creek, could finally sleep without fear.